Buenas noches a todos, buenas noches a todos.
Thank you, Ella, so much for being here with us. Good evening.
Because one of our guests speaks only English, besides many other things, but not Catalan or Spanish. Anna understands perfectly Spanish, so you can address to her in Castilian, I mean, if you wish. So thank you for being here, for being interested in what is happening in Ukraine. I think it is extremely necessary to be interested, not only because of them, but also, and very much, because of ourselves. Because what is happening in Ukraine has very, very much to do with what is already happening with us and that could happen at some point with us. So I'm not going to waste too much time in presentations because you already know the most detailed information about our speakers. Olena Halushka is probably one of the, for me, the best representative of the new Ukrainian civil society activist. She has been devoting all her time, all her capacity, and she is extremely bright in developing the capacities of the Ukrainian civil society and to strengthen the European future for Ukraine. Really, you know, the incredible life of the Ukrainian civil society is something that has really impressed me since many years ago. I don't think there are many other European countries with such a level of civil society activism in favor of the democratic construction of the state. So, and Olena has been in many different capacities working as an activist, and the most important one lately is the one regarding the fight against corruption. You probably have heard that Ukraine is a very corrupt country, one of the worst corrupt countries in Europe. So let me tell you that it is true, there is corruption in Ukraine. A joke comparing to the one which exists in Russia. And it is a phenomenon which is being fought not only with policies from the government, which is very important, of course, but also, again, from the civil society. And they are watchdogs. I can assure you they will not forgive anything to the government regarding any negligence with the fight against corruption. So, on the other hand, we have Anna Korbut, who is a journalist and an analyst. Anna is also one of the most impressive representatives of this civil society in another capacity, in a more from her professional journalist and expert background. And she is especially subtle in her analysis of of the events. She is not just white and black. She doesn't have just a white and black approach to realities. She is really, I mean, she takes you very in depth of this complexity. So I will put to them a few questions, and both of them will answer from their perspective and with their approach and everything. I believe you have translation. So let's start. we have to finish at 8, so we will try to spare half an hour, 20 minutes for Q&A, questions and answers. So there is now, probably you know that, and maybe some of you think that, there is a new mood in our countries, meaning in European Union, also in the States, in the West in general, this new mood which says that it is clear that Ukraine cannot win. And that the West is fatigué. It has the fatigue of the tiredness of supporting Ukrainian economy and military effort. So what does it mean? How is it perceived from Ukraine?
Thank you very much, Carmen. Thank you very much, dear ladies and gentlemen. It's a very big pleasure and honor for me to be here. And I'm truly fascinated by such a large audience of interested people. So first of all, thank you very much for standing with Ukraine. Just today in the morning, I read in news that Iran supplied to Russia 400 ballistic missiles. And North Korean ballistic missiles already killed 24 civilians in Kyiv, Kharkiv, and frontline towns of the Donetsk region. I think that what many people are missing in this new phase of war that differs a lot in 2024 comparing to 2014 is that back in 2014 it has been Russia against Ukraine alone. Right now it's the alliance of evil, which is building capacities, which is testing technologies and improving technologies, which are testing the red lines of the West and how the West is ready to enforce violations of those red lines. And what they are seeing is impunity, because we were promised that supplies of ballistic missiles by Iran and North Korea would be a red line. All that it meant was condemnation. Can you really put condemnation into your air defense systems and shoot down and intercept those missiles? Hardly. Simultaneously, we are seeing that the Western commitment to help Ukraine sustain this fight and our survival is unfortunately declining. What we are seeing in the US is very worrying. And I've been talking a lot to Ukraine's partners in Europe, and I'm absolutely sure that we have to think of the plan B, and based on the assumption that American money is not coming to Ukraine, because the withdrawal from Avdiivka is a very direct consequence of the lack of ammunition, and lack of ammunition is happening because of the lack of commitment to support Ukraine. And I think that, I am representative of the International Center for Ukrainian Victory. I am 100% sure that Ukraine can win this war, and we managed to show truly miracles with very limited resources. Back in 2022, Ukrainians with old, rubbish, Soviet-style weapons managed to liberate Kherson and Kharkiv regions. In 2023, when everybody was focused on the so-called failed ground counteroffensive, Ukraine managed to achieve a lot in the Black Sea, which unfortunately is very often underreported. Ukraine ensured freedom of navigation in the Black Sea, and right now the number of commercial vessels that are exporting grain through Black Sea corridor is reached the a pre-large war level, meaning that the UN facilitated grain deal was much less efficient than Ukraine, capable of defending the Black Sea. In 2024, when we finally achieve F-16 fighter jets, hopefully longer range missiles, Taurus and Atacams that are currently, unfortunately, not coming, there might be some progress, and technologies, there might be some progress on the ground too. However, we also have to realize that Ukraine's defeat in this war is still a very realistic scenario. It's absolutely preventable, it's absolutely avoidable, but the West currently falls into the trap of self-defeatism. This war, which is winnable and has been winnable from the start, the West was treated, well, in a wrong way, being afraid of the escalation, but how can self-defense be an escalation? We are surviving, and the Russian goal in this war have never changed. They plan to either subjugate Ukraine or destroy us, just like they destroyed Mariupol, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Severodonetsk, Liman, and plenty of other smaller towns and villages. Russia will stop only when they are stopped. And they will be stopped not with the peace agreements, but probably that we will discuss later, but with the force. And force is about timely supplies of the necessary weapons in important, necessary quantities.
Thank you very much, Olena. Anna, could you add something to that?
Yeah, I think I would like to add some more smaller details that are I find quite illustrative. So when I travel back to Ukraine with my family, where my family is, when we go visit our friends in Kyiv or Kharkiv, of course you see the war, because, for instance, when I go visit my family in the West, in like a small town, we have the cortege of cars bringing the fallen soldiers to their villages or to our town, basically every day, sometimes multiple times a day. And so the war is very visible and very feelable. On the other hand, during our last visit to Ukraine in Kharkiv, there was like a day or 2 days full of cultural events, cultural agendas that were taking place mostly underground, because clearly you cannot gather quantities of people in like normal, like we would gather here. So people would gather in the metro or in some underground, in the basements. And so you would have a theater play for kids, or you would have classes, school classes for kids who are going to the metro instead of the school because they risk being bombed. Or you have a couple of architects who are working on restoration of Kharkiv's architectural heritage, even amidst the war, even amidst the risk of everything being destroyed with just one missile or drone hit. They still keep working on that. In Kyiv, the same. Like I came to Kyiv, and there is like one Facebook account that I follow, and she had a cultural agenda for a week, full of exhibitions, art things. I guess what I'm trying to say is that despite this war of destruction and the existential war that Russia is waging against Ukraine, one of the acts of defiance and resistance is these small acts that everyone takes on a daily basis in order to counter that. A, to show life, to manifest life. B, to keep life going. You would say normal life. I mean, nothing is normal about that normality. But to keep the normal life going, to keep developing, keep building some constructive agendas, be it in cultural, in politics, or in the economy, or in business. And so these small acts, when united, they create the energy and the resistance that is necessary against this energy of destruction that Russia, and the war of destruction that Russia is waging. I think in the context of this conversations about fatigue, people in Kharkiv have plenty more reasons to be fatigued and tired than I would say people in Madrid or London or Berlin do. And I mean, I completely understand all the problems that people face with inflation, with price changes, with also political turmoils. But still, but what I learned from people in Kharkiv or in Kiev is that they're defined in taking actions and doing whatever they can in order to support life and to support resistance, to contribute to resistance from the place where they are. I think to counter this fatigue, we don't need to wait for leaders. We don't need to wait for political trends. We don't need to wait for something big to happen. If each of us takes an action, takes an initiative that can contribute, I think that adds to that fights both the Russian aggression and the new world that Russia wants to build, and that also fights the fatigue. And also, like in Ukraine, of course, in Ukraine people are tired. People are very, very tired. They're exhausted about being afraid for their children, sending their children to school and not knowing whether that school will be bombed while they're working. I myself felt that anxiety when I was with my 2-year-old daughter at a bookstore and the air alarm went off. And I was like, where do I go? If I were on my own, I would go to the shelter or I would hide between two walls. I wouldn't care much. But with a 2-year-old, when I think of her being under the rubble, I panic and I need to, I need to do something. And this is the state in which people live on a daily basis, on a minute by minute, like I guess Olena as well, because she's based in Kiev. But I think these everyday acts, doing what you can, and maybe more, taking an extra effort to contribute to the victory, whatever it will look like, but to contribute to the victory and to contribute to resistance and defiance against Russia's ambition. I think that's the main recipe against this fatigue. And that can also translate into the major political agendas, because political leaders, they can lead, but they need the support and the inspiration from people from the grassroots on the grassroots level. And that can also lead the leaders to be more defined and to get the inspiration for defiance and against this fatigue.
Thank you very much, Anna. Following in this line of how people, just people, react, I mean, how they live their everyday life. What about, in general, public support to the government and to the war effort? Are they ready to give up, for instance, territory for peace, which is something that is being discussed almost everywhere, and now more than before? What would you say to that?
Together with our center, we have conducted a public opinion poll last summer asking people what are their red lines. And people were very strong that they cannot compromise on the territorial integrity, on EU integration, and on NATO integration. And I think that, you know, when we are hearing from everywhere that, come on, sit on the table, do the peace deal with Russia, and you will stop dying, we want our partners to understand that we do not like dying. You know, it is not something we enjoy and want to be doing. This war has an existential nature. This war is not about, you know, a few towns, piece of land, a little bit here, a little bit of there. This is the genocidal war, and if you take a look at the patterns that Russians apply in the occupied territories, they are all the same. Torture chambers, assassinations, mass graves, massive brainwashing of kids into Russians. I mean, I'm very closely following the publics of news from Mariupol government in exile, and they write a lot about what is happening in town right now. I mean, that's hell. You know, currently all of the schools of Mariupol have a very large celebrations how they are preparing for Putin's elections. And everybody, all of the kids are drawing, you know, the pictures, the photos, that they are doing exhibitions. They are brainwashing kids. They make these kids hate Ukraine, hate Ukrainians, and they want to prepare soldiers out of them to make sure that they will be killing us in the next phases of this war. And for everybody who says that, you know, sit on the table and you will have peace, I'm asking, you know, what peace did Minsk Agreement give to us in 2014, 2015? This was the timeout which Russia took in order to build up their troops, build their military potential, and then, you know, restart the full-scale genocide. The only real peace, sustainable peace, can be achieved only if we have, first, Russian defeat, and second, full accountability. Because this war is a direct consequence of Russian never punished wars in Ichkeria when they occupied Chechnya, in Georgia, after which we saw the, restart of the Western relationship with Russia. Because Crimea was never responded properly, Crimean occupation, or occupation of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, their part, or Syria. I mean, Russians were doing horrible things in Syria. Carpet bombing of Aleppo, chemical weapons, plenty of other war crimes. And we all, as the humanity, were absolutely didn't care about that. And that all paved the way to their genocide in Ukraine. If Russia is not punished and brought to account for what they have been doing, and they have been doing a lot. Mariupol, I mean, it was genocide in Mariupol. Deportation of kids, occupation of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, blowing up the Kakhovka Dam, and huge climate and environmental catastrophe for that. War crimes against prisoners of war, including the terrorist act in Olenivka. Massive terrorist acts when Russians are targeting deliberately residential areas and residential houses across entire country. No place in Ukraine is safe, no place. Even people in Lviv know that if the ballistic missile is fired at Lviv, it will likely end in a residential building, killing up 30, 40 people at home in their sleep. How can those things go unpunished? Why, if those things go unpunished, all of a sudden tomorrow Russia, with the support of North Korea, Iran, Belarus, but also China, why won't they multiply this to other countries? If they have made a conclusion that the West cannot manage plenty of different wars simultaneously, and when the new crisis pops up, then the attention is refocused, and all of a sudden a fatigue appears on one war, and the attention starts drawing to another war. So I think that what we are trying to convey is that the world should stop repeating mistakes which we have been doing for the last 30 years after the Cold War, with the hope that, this time the outcome would be different. No, this time the outcome would be absolutely the same, even worse, if the mistakes are allowed to be repeated.
Thank you very much, Olena. Anna, what about this how the people that you have been in contact recently with would address this territory for peace, even if it is peace without justice?
Well, I think there are two layers to this, and I'm gonna. It's complex, but I'm gonna try to be brief. So one layer that I see is the attitude of the general people, general public, and of course, like if initially you may have had like more defiance or higher rates of people not accepting any territorial trade-offs for peace. Then now, especially in the areas closer to the east and to the south, you may have more people who say, okay, well, trade-off territory for peace is more acceptable. Generally, the majority, the absolute overwhelming majority of Ukrainians, between 70 and 80%, continue to look for a Ukrainian victory. Now, the surveys will not give you an idea of what victory is. And for instance, they are not asking people, so what are you personally ready to contribute for victory? For instance, surveys have found that the majority, overwhelming majority of Ukrainians are willing to wait out or last for as long as it takes, for as long as the war takes. So people are not willing to get subjugated to Russia, to accept Russia's demands, which would mean basically compromising Ukraine's sovereignty and its choices of its own political, economic, societal models. But then the more violent the bombardment gets, the more people are dying, and the more we witness all this violence, all these deaths, all these sufferings, you can understandably, some people will start thinking that, okay, maybe some territory in exchange for peace is viable. But then there is a different layer of expertise and of strategic thinking. And strategic thinking is, what kind of peace can you get? And first of all, is there anyone in Russia to whom you can talk about peace? And then what kind of peace they can offer. Is that a sustainable peace? Is that a peace that will allow Ukraine to live a normal life, develop, choose its own political, economic, societal systems? Or is it a peace like in Belarus, where basically there's a ton of political prisoners, some of them dying in jails. You cannot say anything against the government or authorities. Everybody who had any opinion or who had any, who came out to the streets, or even who had just maybe some minimal civil position, had to either leave, and now their families are getting searched and visited by the local security services, One journalist just died. And I'm not mentioning what is happening inside Russia. So that peace that we can accomplish with that we could in theory, or that people think we could in theory negotiate with Russia, there is no one to negotiate with, because Russia and its political leadership have not shown any intent of negotiating peace. And then secondly, how sustainable such a peace could be. Olena has mentioned Minsk, which has not led us anywhere. I mean, maybe it has given us time to prepare a bit, but you cannot really prepare, if you're a normal country, you cannot really prepare for such a violent war. But then it's not a sustainable peace. So what we have to I think what we have to prioritize now, instead of talking about victory or the impossibility of victory, or putting Ukraine at a negotiation table and talking peace with Russia, what we should talk about is how to reinforce Ukraine's capacity and the West's capacity to resist Russia's aggressive ambitions as much as possible, so that both Ukraine and the West are in the best negotiating position if we come to that, if we ever come to that. I think that should be the priority of our conversation. So talking about our effort now that is contributing to a possible future result, rather than lamenting and feeling sorry and feeling tired about a result that hasn't arrived, but that we feel pessimistic about.
I agree very much with what you just say, Anna. And I would remind you that the Minsk agreements didn't work precisely, among other things, but one of the main reasons, from my point of view, is it was because it was imposed to Ukraine. It was imposed because Ukraine was at that time extremely weak, militarily and politically, but basically militarily. So when it, except if you are someone else than Putin, then it could work. But being the Russian power what it is, it doesn't work. So what she said about, we are talking about Ukrainians that should be ready for the negotiation of peace. With whom? I mean, who is on the other side of the table? Because it's not just Russia. There is someone called Putin who has been repeating, when he says that he is ready for peace, he explains exactly what he means by peace. And for instance, in the interview with Carlson, I mean, interview, if you can call that an interview, the monologue he had with Carlson recently, he says, peace, yes, of course. Just, I mean, in 1 week we have it. Just stop supporting them, sending them weapons, and we will have peace in 1 week. What peace? The peace of the cemetery? La paz de los cementerios? Well, for that, the Ukrainians are sure that that is one prospect. We must understand that it is not something that they would want to go to. So the other, but then we heard and we have seen that there have been divisions in the top of the military. So is it related to this fatigue? Is it related to a more delicate situation regarding the relations with the partners? Is it related to a more internal related situation? Could you please explain us? Because it is true that we do not have too much, I mean, we have some elements of analysis, but maybe you can add something more.
Yes, I'll try to add something more, but I would also like to add on your previous point with regards to legitimacy of the Russian authorities, because please keep in mind that in March, they will have the so-called presidential elections, which would actually be Putin's elections, and they will have nothing common with democracy. And, you know, it's not that he would be, when he is elected at these fake elections, he would have basically any legitimacy as the leader of Russia. That is why, you know, there is no body to possibly talk about peace from the perspective of their willingness, but also from the legitimacy of power as well, which is very important, because we hope that international partners won't recognize those elections, including the elections at the occupied territories, and won't send any observers, because that scam, fake process should be fully ignored and boycotted. With regards to Ukraine, well, of course, as Anna explained very well, our society is tired, which is natural, because 2 years we are defending, you know, from the second largest army in the world, and now the second largest army in the world is getting reinforcement from other terrorist regimes, and we are basically, you know, on the very front line of that. And but still, I think that it's important to see the substitution of the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces. Well, that is, you know, the responsibility and prerogative of Ukrainian president, fully according to the constitution, and that's why he bears, you know, full responsibility for this decision. Well, personally, I, of course, admired General Zaluzhny, and I think that he played an incredibly historic role in the darkest times of the history of our country. And he made it already to the history of the world, and his actions would definitely be studied in the history books. But General Syrsky, he used to be in the team of General Zaluzhny. They worked very closely. General Syrsky was chairing the ground forces of Ukraine, meaning that I would expect that he will continue more or less, you know, I'm not expecting any big positive groundbreaking dynamics because Ukraine is facing serious challenges on the battlefield. I mean, you know, as I said, the lack of ammunition, we are trying to compensate it, let's say, with drones, but Russians are learning very fast, unfortunately. You know, we have this myth, at the very beginning, we had this myth of Russian invincibility, which then shifted completely into the myths of their underestimation. Oh, they are idiots, you know. No, unfortunately, they are learning very fast, and they still have the access to Western technologies. Let's say their ballistic missile Kinzhal has 77 components that are Western-made, mostly manufactured in the US, but not only, meaning that they do have the access to the important components, plus they continue selling, you know, the oil, gas, and having money for their war machine. You know, that's why I'm not expecting that the situation will dramatically shift on the battlefield in favor of Ukraine, though, as General Zaluzhny said, technologies can make this shift and can help to avoid the stalemate, because otherwise we would be fighting with our people, and people are our most precious asset. We can't afford, you know, using Ukrainian soldiers as Russia is using their soldiers as the meat grinder. That's why, you know, just as for the previous 2 years, we will continue advocating for maximum military assistance, for Europe to finally ramp up your production, because Europe still lives in the peacetime conditions. And, you know, the sooner this deep peace mentality is changed, the better it would be for all of us. And, you know, coming back to Ukraine's internal domestic situation, as Carmen said from the very beginning, we continue watchdogging what Ukrainian government does. We, of course, continue monitoring their activities, and in case if we reveal some cases of corruption, we report them, and we make very big pressure over the government to fix that. And I have to say that the demand of the Ukrainian society for justice, for real reforms, is very high. So that's why I'm pretty optimistic that EU accession process will be a powerful tool to continue holding Ukrainian government accountable, but also continue promoting those democratic reforms even while Ukraine is defending from genocide. And last point is that EU integration is already bringing tangible results, because Ukraine improved its corruption perception index by 3 points over 2023 after Ukraine received EU candidate status and 7 steps of the reforms that were attached to it, meaning that this tool works and it has to be applied further, more actively and proactively.
Thank you, Olena. Would you like to add something, Anna?
Yeah, one thing I would like to add is that, I mean, I, as Ukrainian, like if I monitor the social media and just the social life in Ukraine, you see a lot of like scandals about either corruption or scandals criticizing the actions of the political leadership or the military leadership. And on the one hand, it can be discouraging to see so much negative information. But then on the other hand, that means that even during such a trial, such a period of trial as the full-scale war, You still have, as Olena mentioned, demand for a better society and a better country. You still have a layer of people who are willing to invest their effort and who see the prospect in that. So in building a better country, even in the time of war, because it's another crucial effort. And so that is, to me, and then while there is the government, there is the political class, it makes decisions, some decisions we don't necessarily like, but then these two classes, the civil society or the critical mass and the government, they coexist, they respond to each other, maybe not in the perfect way or the way we could see in like peaceful democracies, but they still react to each other. And I think that's very important. It's a very important legacy of the revolution that we had 10 years ago that won, by contrast to, say, Belarus and Russia. We don't have our opposition leaders killed in jails. We don't have our activists basically either exiled or arrested. And our activists are inside the country and are very critical and are very loud about what the government does. And then also, for instance, in the past a year or two, there have been a lot of decisions from the political leadership, from the replacement of the Minister of Defense based on accusations of corruption, or to the current replacement of the military leadership, but also shows that the political leadership cannot not respond to the criticism, to the normal democratic demands that people make. And so that's, while it may seem like a discouraging flow of information as a phenomenon, I find it as a factor of strength, as a factor of hope.
We actually call it, the paradox of transparency, because the more you report corruption, the more the better civil society and investigative journalists are doing their job, the more our law enforcement agencies are delivering on searches, opening of the cases, and a lot of visible work. The more perception people have that, oh, come on, it's impossible. They are drowning in corruption. They are hopeless. But I mean, no. The fact that Ukrainian investigative journalists and NABU and SAPO are investigating corruption during the full-scale war is the sign of strength. And it's the sign that what we managed to build between 2014, 2022, those institutions work, and all those nitty-gritty details, which are boring, institutional, badly understood in the societies, they do deliver results. But when you start explaining things like that, people say, yes, it makes sense, but if it goes without the context, then it's very often perceived as if like hopeless.
Absolutely. I mean, Ukraine is a democratic society, not a fully democratic society yet, because it's also about building institutions, but they are, believe me, on their way. And that is one more reason why we have to fight for them. Because we are not fighting for just poor people attacked by a big, bad neighbor. It is, there are people who are fighting for what in our countries we consider given. We give it for given. We live in peace and we live in democracy, and of course we all the time criticize this democracy because it's never enough, it's not perfect, and all that, but very few people are really aware of the fact that it is an incredible privilege in the world in which we live to be able to do that. So yes, I think that is one of the arguments why, one of the reasons why we should support Ukraine and fight for Ukraine and insist on the verb of fighting. Because you see, if Iran, North Korea, China, if they're not shy in providing all the necessary weapon and military support that Russia needs, why are we? I mean, don't we think that this is part of what is also at stake for us? We would be very, very mistaken if we don't understand that. So, if we do understand that, what more can be done? And that will be the last, because then we will have to go to the questions. What more can be done, and how? And how? I mean, what could be the implications of letting Ukraine down?
So, first of all, what is incredibly needed is, of course, maximum military assistance and the red lines to be finally lifted, because why we are receiving all of the new types of weapons after we, spent a year of campaigning and, thinking out some creative ways, writing articles, protesting near the governments. I have very big doubts whether Russia was, organizing creative flash mobs on Twitter to ask North Korea for 1 million artillery shells. But how come that North Korea alone can provide more artillery shells to Russia than entire European Union, which is much more powerful and much richer union than this one country. But, in case if the question is money, and we are extremely grateful for all of the money that we are receiving from Western taxpayers, but we think that it's also very important to make Russia pay. And that's why, we came up with this campaign called Make Russia Pay, which is aimed at confiscating $300 billion of Russian central bank assets that were frozen in the first days of the full-scale war in the G7 countries. We think that, that's fine. We think that this is a part of justice, but not only justice. This is also the matter of providing sustainable resources for Ukraine in the long term, especially given that we do not know what will be the outcome of the US elections. Many people say that, there are some legal, there are some financial issues, but let's be very honest. Letting Russia win in Ukraine will have much more severe legal, international, political, and financial implications than confiscation of the Russian assets, because international legal scholars came up with the justification that this money can be confiscated as the countermeasure, and to make this countermeasure reversible, this confiscated money will be offset as the reparation payments for Russia, which means that G7 countries have already committed that they won't return this money to Russia until it pays reparations, meaning that the question is not whether to return this money or not, because the commitment is that it won't be returned. The question is whether this money will be lying dead on the accounts of financial institutions, and they will be making super profits on that, or this money will be invested into saving Ukrainian lives. And we think that, and compensation of the damages, and we think that part of this money should also be spent on ramping up production, because if, our European partners have issues with ramping up production because it requires to place big orders with the big investment, then, it makes sense to take some of money from here. And that would be the win-win-win for everybody, because, Ukraine will have necessary tools and support in time. You will have your stocks filled in and your arsenals in place, because what Russia is currently Russia is also following the news very well. And when Russia hears that, Germany has nothing in their stocks, what conclusion Russia is taking away from this story that Europe is vulnerable and can be attacked. We do not want to attack. We want, this to be our joint victory. And these resources are the potential source for that. Other things, and I will mention very briefly, is serious sanctions, because again, Russia continues doing hundreds of billions of dollars annually on selling oil and gas, but this time liquefied natural gas more than gas through the pipe. But still, this is their budget-making source, and that. And Spain, unfortunately, is increasing the purchases of gas from Russia. I mean, how come? And not only Spain, other countries in Europe, like Belgium, are doing this as well. Technology sanctions. I mean, the loopholes should be closed, and the evasion of the technology sanctions should be very strictly punished. As well as sanctions against Rosatom should be applied, because what Rosatom is doing at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, it's absolutely unprecedented nuclear disaster. And I think that if we manage to ensure, on one hand, sustainable systemic support for Ukraine's self-defense, which won't depend on the electoral cycle in our partner countries, and on the other hand, we manage to truly cut the funding and resources of Russia and their capacities to wage this war, it would be much easier for Ukraine to win it.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. Yes, this is a topic that is being discussed more and more, increasingly. You would like to add something, or?
Well, my addition would be more abstract, is I remember talking to a lot of people in Ukraine before February 24, 2022, and discussing whether the full-scale invasion would actually happen at that scale, and a lot of people said they didn't believe in it. I thought they did believe in it, they just were in denial about the threat and the scale of the threat. I see the same now in European countries, I mean, in the West in general, of course. Right now, Spain is quite far from the war in Ukraine, and the bombs are not falling here. But right now, the world of the future, that's for us, but mostly for our children, is being made. And I think now is the time not to just engage in discussions or in debates or being depressed and pessimistic about a result. It's the time to remobilize the effort, not sit back and think that nothing can be done, but to find what someone personally can done and how someone personally can contribute on the political, societal, cultural, or financial level in order to help build an actually more just future for us or for our children. Ukrainians on the front line, even with the help alone, because right now they're fighting with the vital help of the West, but the fighting is they're doing on their own. So I think that this remobilization of the effort and change of mentality from denial of the threat to accepting the threat and facing the threat, I think that would be an important act and a timely act that this period in which we live requires.
I cannot agree more, and I think that we here in this room, in Catalonia, in Spain, in Europe, we have to be very aware of our individual responsibility in that, because it is not true that we cannot do anything for the war in Ukraine. It is not true. We can push our government, and we can support the decisions of our government in the direction of a better and stronger support to Ukraine. We can not elect those politicians that we do know are close or very good friends of Russia, etc., etc. We do have an individual responsibility for that. So now we have 25 minutes for questions. There was one hand there, 2 and 3 over there. I will take 3, and then we will. Montse, you, the sir behind, and then you, the fourth.
Thank you, Carmen. And thank you for being here, and thanks to CIDOB for organizing this event.
Just one thing, I will ask you to introduce yourself, just to say I'm a journalist, and be brief. Concrete questions, so we can give the floor to more people.
Yes, I'm a retired journalist, and by the way, I was in Ukraine in 1914 when the events happened. And every time we have all these discussions, I can't help, but my mind goes back 30 years ago of what happened to Bosnia. You are talking, you need military support. For them, at the beginning at least, it was even worse because they were under an arms embargo, which of course helped those who had the arms, who happened to be the stronger force and the aggressors. Many of the things you said, of course the situation is different, but there were also similarities from you mentioned cultural activities underground and all these small details. That also happened in Visit Sarajevo, by the way. But going to the core question, then the conflict there ended basically with an imposed peace based on events, on what had happened on the ground by the use of force. So the question is, are we really at risk that this is also the end of the Ukrainian war? An imposed peace by the foreign powers that have already getting tired of this, you mentioned it, of this never-ending war, and short of an international intervention, nobody sees how that will end. And second question, very quickly, what do you think would be the impact in the case of a Trump victory in the elections in the United States this year? Bearing in mind what he has just said about the countries who don't pay enough to NATO. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Montse. The gentleman at the end, or no, it was you maybe? I'm so sorry. First this one, yes. And then, first the gentleman, sí, perdón. Before.
Good evening, I'm Javier Perez, I'm a businessman, and thank you for your presence here. A quick question. About 50 years ago, Vietnam won the war against America because there was a strong public opinion in the States, and because when the Americans were losing the war, they were not prepared to use the nuclear arms. Now, if none of those two conditions happens today in Russia, no strong public opinion apparently, and maybe this regime is prepared to do anything in order not to lose the war, the only outcome I could see is that Putin disappears. Would you agree in that opinion and this statement? How can you win a war against a nuclear power if that country is prepared to use it eventually?
And the third one over there, and then it will be the next round for you.
Sí. Mi nombre es Lu.
My name is Luque Echevarria. I am a senator from the...
Sí.
Sí.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. My name is Luque Echevarria. I am a senator from the National Basque Party. Thank you very much for your presentations. This has been extraordinarily enlightening in such complicated times. Let me restate that for our political party, the Ukrainian freedom is the freedom of Europeans, and we have to be absolutely consistent with that idea. I wanted to ask you about NATO. To us, it's very clear that Ukraine, the future of Ukraine must be European. And we're very happy that the adhesion negotiations for membership have already started. But from the point of view of security and safety, considering the very scarce European Union's common foreign policy, and the European Union's foreign policy architecture is NATO dependent. In the case of Ukraine, could you have a neutral status based on the fact that Russia would not wage any aggression against Ukraine? Would that be acceptable would it be acceptable to be a member of the EU but not a member of NATO with a neutrality status, with Putin's commitment not to wage an aggressive war against Ukraine ever again? Would that be realistic? Would that be a potentially acceptable agreement for peace? Yes, thank you.
Be happy to answer 3 questions as I see. The first one on Bosnia. I'm not an expert in Western Balkans, but I know that my colleagues, visited Bosnia a few years ago, and they said that, whoever they were talking to, they had the feeling of this, lack of justice, and, that something was not resolved, which also played somehow against their potential of develop and basically, bloom as the state. But what I want to say on the imposed peace, there won't be imposed peace in Ukraine, because Russia won't stop until it fully takes over Ukraine and then moves forward. Whatever will be agreed in between will only be the time out, the breather for Russia to rearm, conscript more people from the occupied territories, get more weapons, from North Korea, Iran, and then hit us again. Because their eventual goal is to take Ukraine over, meaning that any forced peace would just be a gift to Russia to get more time to be able to hit Ukraine more effective and more bloodier, because they know our strength already. They underestimated us in 2022, but by that time they would be smarter, as I said, because they are learning very fast. That's why, unfortunately, we do not believe in anything like that, and we can try to continue explaining to partners why our victory should be their eventual goal. On nukes, nuclear deterrence works only if there is a deterrence. There's no deterrence anymore. And what any country, any dictatorship is drawing the lesson from this war is that you are getting nukes, then you are blackmailing, and then you're achieving whatever you want to. That's why China already announced that they plan to double their arsenal of nukes by 2030. That's why rest assured that Iran is supplying ballistic missiles and drones and technologies to Russia, not for free. North Korea, that there were some leaks in media that they are receiving the fighter jets from Russia, including those that can carry, sophisticated missiles and so on and so forth. The news that Russia is planning to send their nukes into the space is particularly because they understand that they can blackmail with the nukes, nuclear strikes, whoever they want to. So in case if Ukraine is sacrificed in order to avoid the nuclear war, why Baltic state won't be next? Why Poland won't be next using the same, approach? Why Germany won't be next? Or, about potential confrontation between US and China. A very dangerous precedent is being created right now, particularly because the West is not communicated very strongly and applying this nuclear deterrence. And as long as you, as the West, will continue to fall into Russian nuclear blackmail, the more you will be welcoming the attacks and the use of the nuclear weapons in practice, because by trying to avoid nuclear attack at any cost, you know, ironically, it is only advancing. On NATO, of course not. Of course, this won't, our neutral status won't help, because back in 2014 we were absolutely neutral. The support for NATO in our society was something like 25% or something like that. It was never about NATO. It was never even, you know, about the European Union. It's about Ukrainians living decent life with democracy, rule of law, and all those things which Russian regime is depriving their society of, and their society is absolutely happy with this, and they are accepting this as the part of their social contracts. That is why Russia doesn't want us in NATO, because Russia wants Ukraine to be defenseless, and we want to have proper tools and sufficient instruments to be defending ourselves. So we cannot stay in a gray zone anymore. I do not believe in the EU integration without NATO integration, simply because security comes first and then comes the economic growth. How will we attract investments and companies into the reconstruction if they aren't, you know, 100% sure that this war won't return in the next 3 to 5 years? But even more important, how will we return our refugees, families with the kids that are currently abroad, or those that are in Ukraine and, you know, who will be planning their lives in the long-term perspective? As the mother of a small boy, I have to think very seriously. I don't want him to be dying in the 5th phase of this war after Russia is renewing it over and over again, and nobody learns from the mistakes. And these are very serious things which we all have to discuss, that long-term depopulation of Ukraine by making Ukraine a failed state, because people won't plan to return, because we will have issues with exports and, you know, commercial. Russia wants to cut us from the seas, and that's why they plan to capture Odessa as well. And just today Medvedev said, you know, over again that Odessa is a Russian town. I mean, don't buy this Russian propaganda. Ukraine will be the asset for NATO, not a burden, because we have the strongest combat experienced army, which has the direct experience of countering alone the military, which is considered the top direct threat to NATO. How come, you know, so many do not see the advantages which our membership in NATO would bring, instead of focusing, you know, all the time that it's not going to work?
The floor to Anna. I would like to add a little piece of information regarding this NATO thing. Something like a month, maybe a month and a half, now I don't remember exactly the date, after the start of the full-scale war, President Zelensky offered, I say that he was ready to consider the neutrality of Ukraine. And there were discussions about the Swiss model, don't you remember that? Yes, the Switzerland model, etc. He said it publicly. The discussion was public. Did you ever heard anything from the Kremlin saying, oh, we are interested about that? No, because it has never been about NATO. Russian aggression is not about NATO at all. Would you like to add something, or shall we go to...
I think you guys answered everything.
More questions? Or what did you say?
Yeah, we can go to more questions.
Okay, so now it's for you, and then here and there. Okay. We have, let's say, 15 minutes left. So please be short.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for your presentations. I fully agree with Olena, and I personally wish you and the people of Ukraine the best of the best. what happened is that sometime we should get away from the emotional approach, the world of wishes, to go to the realistic approach. We have heard here today that there are even some Ukrainian people that are tired of the war. We know that there are some European countries which are tired as well. We know that the Congress, the US Congress, is taking more and more time to approve the financial assistance to Ukraine. We don't know what happened in November with the unpredictable election and the unpredictable approach that the new president of the United States can take. Putin is not going to withdraw the troops and say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, I'm going back to Russia after what happened, because there are people dying as well in Russia. So given this scenario, my question is how you value the risk that the Ukrainian war is not going to end. It's going to be encapsulated. Nobody is going to win. Nobody is going to say, I won the war. It's not going to be a peace table saying, I recognize. Ukraine is not going to recognize ever the sovereignty of 60% of Ukrainian land taken by Putin. Is something like this, more or less a peace situation. Probably in consideration, these funds, 3 billion euros used from the oligarchies used to reconstruct the Ukrainian country and so forth, to have this kind of tacit, implied peace. How do you value this risk? Thank you.
Okay, Tamara. Tamara, después. No, primero aquí.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Tamara Germanovic. I'm from the former Yugoslavia. I moved to Barcelona when the war started in my country. Then, for example, in the former Yugoslavia, in Bosnia especially, the transition, and also in Serbia, I'm from Serbia, I'm from Belgrade, the transition is terrible. We have a very bad political situation everywhere. The worst economical crisis in Bosnia, unfortunately. There is corruption everywhere, Croatia, Serbia, at least, and Bosnia. But even with the bad politicians, worst or better, now they have to collaborate, they have to speak. The neighbors from the different, for example, in Bosnia, there are Bosnians, there are Serbians, Croatians, neighbors which were before in war and lose their families. Now they have to talk somehow. They are in contact, not only countries, but only as well as the individual level. My question is how you see in the future, let's imagine Russia without Putin. Do you can imagine that Ukraine can have some kind of good future without relation with Russia? Not Putin's Russia, but do you have any contact with the people from Russia or Russians from the other part? They live in different part in Europe or even in Ukraine, which are thinking more or less like you or are against this war? Because we know, from my point of view, it's really Putin's war more than
Russia's war.
This?
Thank you, Tamara. And then the gentleman over there. Ahí con las gafas.
My name is Josep Bertran. I am also a teacher in the University Pompeu Fabra. I would like to, if you could help me a little bit to understand, why would the Russians fear that the country next door is democratic? Why? It's something that for me, I have some ideas, but maybe you can explain me further why. I understand that they fear NATO. That's why we think that way here, no? And as you explained, thank you very much for that explanation. It was very clarifying. Can you upgrade me, please, on that line of thought? I mean, why they fear that we are democratic. So what? No? That's my point at this point. Thank you.
Okay, I think that you answer and we will finish there because we will not have more time.
Anna.
That's it. Anna?
Well, okay, I'll try to answer some fragments of the questions. About, like the fatigue, the risk of peace, even with like the new reality on the ground. I mean, when we talk about fatigue, and I've, in the policy debates around Ukraine and Russia, I've heard this word since February 2022. In the meantime, in February 2022, what we were hoping for, our best hope was some sort of javelins and some sort of grenade launchers and maybe some armored vehicles. Since then, we have moved to, as Olena mentioned, successful drone warfare in the sea. We have moved to serious missiles. We have moved to much stronger air defense capacities that Ukraine has, that has prevented Ukrainian cities from turning into basically Aleppo from Russian bombardment. So when we talk about fatigue, I'm not sure whether we take into account all the things that have happened and developed and evolved throughout this time that, that are counter to what we initially expected. So from the initial expectation of Ukraine falling in 3 days and fighting some sort of like Afghanistan-style guerrilla warfare with javelins, we have moved to Ukraine still standing and defending itself from very sophisticated weapons. So I think, there is a chance we have to talk about fatigue, but I would like the attention to focus more on what can be done in order to change that, in order to counter that. And risk of peace with the new reality on the ground, there is this risk, of course. It's a very tangible risk, but as I said, is that peace sustainable? I don't see it as sustainable for the many reasons, including the ones that Olena described, but mostly because that will not make Russia change its mentality and its ambitions, and that's the main driver of what it's doing and what is happening right now. In terms of the good relations with Russia in the future, I'll share a personal story. So my grandmother fought against the Nazis. She joined the Red Army when she was 17. Her father, her husband, also fought the Nazis in the Red Army. He didn't survive until I was born, but I had a chance to speak to my grandmother. She hated the Nazis, and as a translation, she hated the Germans. Not in general, but when you talked about it, like she was uneasy talking about the Germans. She was 70 at that point, I guess. Part of it was still propaganda, but the Germans, I have German friends, and I'm perfectly okay, I'm perfectly fine with Germany, with Spain. Because the Germans have processed what they've done. They have learned the lessons. The other side of my family, they were expelled from Poland. They are Ukrainians, ethnic Ukrainians. They were deported from Poland under Stalin. And I mean, they lived through the period of tensions between the Poles and Ukrainians. That's why my grandmother didn't want to teach me Polish, because she was she felt uneasy and uncomfortable about it. Now, with the Poles, despite all of the problems that we're currently having with the farmers and all that, I'm perfectly. I have friends in Poland. I speak with them like I speak with a Spanish or with people in Catalonia, wherever. So good relations are possible, but the people who have committed crimes and who have made historical mistakes have to process them and have to take accountability for them. Otherwise, another example is my mother's former friend from Russia. So they used to talk like to correspond in letters, share news about their children, us, when they were young. And then her friend with her husband lived in the US. They worked in an IT company and all that. They've seen the world. One of their daughters lives in Finland. And when she called, after a very, very long break, they found themselves on Skype. And this friend called my mom in like shortly after 2014, after the Russian aggression started, after Crimea. And my mom said, well, she asked, how are you? My mom said, well, you know, we're really worried about what's going on. And she said, don't you worry. We're going to split up Ukraine. You will go to Poland. The rest will go to Russia. Everything will be fine. That was their last conversation. So it depends on the Russians. That's what I can say. And the third question, well, maybe...
I'll take it. There is a shorter and longer answer to your question. Shorter is Russian Empire. Without Ukraine, Russian Empire won't be accomplished. And that's something what they want to reintroduce in the short-term perspective. And the capital of Kievan Rus was Kyiv. You know, that's why the strategic importance of Ukraine in the Russian Empire is absolutely evident. That's why they are stealing our history. Right now they are, you know, I've seen just a few weeks ago, there was the event which Russians tried to do in France, you know, with Anna of Kiev being, you know, Russian queen. All of a sudden, that's how they are trying to portray it, and so on and so forth. And that's why, for them, Kyiv is so strategic. That's why we are expecting that they possibly might try to storm and attack Kyiv again, because that's where the Rus was from. You know, we had civilization in Kyiv Rus far before, earlier than Moscow was actually, you know, established. And in their great Russian attitude, you know, it's impossible without Ukraine. But also you have to understand that Belarus is de facto occupied right now. Why? Because they are having the dictator Lukashenko, and Belarus is basically, you know, an ally of Russia in this war. Democratic Ukraine is not an ally of Russia. And democratic Ukraine, why our reforms were dangerous for Russia? Because for decades they were controlling Ukraine through corruption, through their own fifth column inside our secret service, judiciary, law enforcement, etc., etc. When they had those people, their agents, in places they didn't really need, you know, to have Ukraine as actually occupied, you know, and annexed territory. They were fine with this. But when Ukraine started building all those institutions, doing the reforms and drifting away from Russia, they realized that they cannot keep control over our country with their KGB styles anymore. That's why, you know, they resorted to the military approach, and which was later scaled up to full-scale genocide. So it's both about keeping control over Ukraine, but it's also about, you know, this large imperialism. Just for you to understand that Russia has ambitions not only for the territories that were part of the Russian Empire at a certain point. Our colleague Olena Halushka has done an excellent research into Russian strategic narratives. You know, what they are communicating to their people, how they are preparing their people for the next crusade. And they are very clear that they want Great Eurasia, from Lisbon to Vladivostok, under Russian influence and under Russian control. And that's what Putin has once asked President Clinton, you know, to leave, get away from Europe and leave Europe for Russia. And despite the fact that, Spain is, you were lucky to be far away from Russia, but with ambitions, like that, unfortunately, if Russia is not stopped, their direct implications will be felt across the entire continent.
Okay, just one word in that direction from me, and then we will close. Democratic Ukraine is a menace. It's una amenaza? A threat. It's a threat for Russia. It's a threat of Russia because it proves that a Slavic state can be democratic, that there is nothing exclusive, nothing special about being Slavic. It is not true that there is a Slavic way of being democratic, which is what Russia has been trying to sell for not only for their neighbors, but also from abroad for the West, and that some people in the West were kind of tempted in buying. So yes, it is a real threat for Russia, I mean for Putin, because it proves that another Russia is possible. And that is something that he cannot, as you can imagine, even think about. So thank you to all of you. Thank you very much. And well, I hope we'll see you again.